And what if there's already been a search? What if I actually find them in my room? But here was his room, and there was nothing. No one had called to visit him. Not even Nastasia had been in. But, oh Lord, how could he have left all those goods in that hole earlier on? He rushed to the corner, thrust his hand under the wallpaper, and began to haul them out, stuffing his pockets with them. There were 8 items in all. 2 small boxes containing earrings or something of the kind. He didn't pause to look. Then 4 small Morocco leather cases, a chain wrapped in nothing but newspaper, and something else also wrapped in newspaper. He thought it might be a medal. He put everything into various pockets, those of his coat and the one still empty in the right-hand side of his trousers, trying to make it all look as inconspicuous as possible. He took the purse along with all the other items. Then he left the room, this time leaving the door wide open. He walked with a quick, firm step, and even though he felt that he ached all over, he still had his wits about him. He was afraid of his pursuers, afraid that in a quarter or half an hour's time the instruction would be given for him to be followed. And if that were so, then at all costs he must get rid of all the evidence in time. He must succeed in this, while he still had some strength and powers of reasoning at his disposal. Where should he go? This he had decided a long time earlier. I must throw it all in the canal. No one will be any the wiser, and that'll be the end of it. He had arrived at this decision during the night in his delirium, at the moments when he had made his repeated attempts to get to his feet and be off. Quick, quick, go and throw it all away. But throwing it all away turned out to be not that easy. He had now been walking along an embankment of the canal for something like half an hour, or possibly even longer, several times pausing to take a look at the flights of steps leading down to the canal whenever he came across them. But it was out of the question for him to carry out his plan. Either there were rafts at the foot of the steps, with washerwomen on them washing linen, or there were boats tied up, and people swarmed everywhere. Worse still, he would be fully visible from both embankments in all directions, and people would notice what he was doing and think it suspicious that someone should have gone down to the water's edge especially in order to throw something in. What if the leather case didn't sink but floated? But of course that would be what would happen. Everyone would see them, and him. People were already eyeing him enough as it was when they met him, staring him over as though they could think of nothing else. I wonder why that is. Or is it just my imagination? He thought to himself. At last it occurred to him that he might be better off going to some spot along the Neva. There were fewer people there. He'd be less conspicuous. He might at least get a chance to do what he had to do, and most importantly, he'd be further away from the part of town in which he was at present. And he was suddenly filled with astonishment. How was it that he had been wandering around for a whole half an hour in despair and anguish, in a place that held such risk for him, yet had not thought of this before? He'd wasted a whole half hour on a demented plan, for the simple reason that he had thought it up in his delirium. He was becoming thoroughly absent-minded and forgetful, and he knew it. He really must pull himself together. He set off towards the Neva, but on the way another thought suddenly came to him. Why the Neva? Why throw the stuff in the water? Wouldn't it be better to go somewhere very far away, perhaps out to the islands again, find some solitary place in the woods, under a bush somewhere perhaps, and bury it there, perhaps remembering the spot by observing the look of one of the trees? And although he sensed that he was in no condition just then to make clear and sensible decisions, he could see no flaws in this plan. But he was not fated to go to the islands either. Instead, something else happened. As he was emerging onto the square, he suddenly saw on his left the entrance to a yard that was surrounded by completely blank walls. To the right, immediately inside the gate, the vacant blank wall of a neighbouring 4-storey building stretched far into this yard. To the left, running parallel to the blank wall, and also just inside the gate, there was a wooden fence that extended some 20 yards into the interior of the yard, and then made a sudden turning to the left. It was a dead, fenced-off spot, where there were some kind of building materials lying around. Further away, in a hollow of the yard, the corner of a low, soot-grimed stone shed peeped from behind the fence, evidently forming part of some workshop or other. Here there were probably some trade premises, a coachmaker's or metalworks or something of that kind. The entire area, right from the gateway, was blackened with a large quantity of coal dust. This is the sort of place where I can throw it all away and run, he thought suddenly. Observing no one about inside, he strode through the gateway and at once saw, just inside it, a long gutter that had been fitted to the fence. The sort of arrangement that's often found in buildings, where there are a lot of factory hands, artel workers, draymen and the like. On the fence above the gutter, someone had scrawled in chalk the witticism usual in such cases, "Stopping of carts prohibited." This was all to the good, as his having gone in and stopped here would arouse no suspicion. I must throw it all away somehow and get out of here. As he cast another look round, he was already putting his hand into one of his pockets, when he suddenly noticed right up by the outer wall, between the gateway and the gutter, which stood at a distance of just over 2 feet from each other, a large unhewn building block, which might have weighed 50 pounds, was resting close against the stone street wall. Behind this wall lay the street and the pavement. He could hear passers-by, of whom there were invariably not a few in this part of town, shuffling past, but he could not be seen behind the gate, except if someone came in off the street, which was quite likely, and which was why he had to hurry. He stooped down to the block, seized the top of it firmly in both hands, and, mustering all his strength, succeeded in turning it over. Underneath it there was a small hollow. Into this he began to throw the entire contents of his pockets. The purse went on the very top of the pile, yet there still remained room in the hollow. Then he again seized hold of the block, heaved it back with one push into its former position, and there it sat, just as it had been, except that it looked possibly a shade higher. But he raked some earth around it, pressing it into place with his foot. Nothing could be seen. After that, he left the yard and made his way towards the square. Again, an intense, scarcely endurable feeling of joy, like the one he had earlier experienced in the police bureau, took mastery of him for a moment. The evidence is buried, and who would ever think of looking under that block? It's probably been lying there ever since the building was put up. It'll go on lying there just as long. And even if the things are found, who would ever think of me? It's finished. There's no evidence. And he laughed. Yes, he remembered later that he laughed, a long, faint, nervous, inaudible laugh, and that he continued to laugh during the whole time he was crossing the square. But when he set foot on the boulevard, where the day before yesterday he had had that encounter with the young girl, his laughter suddenly evaporated. Other thoughts came creeping into his mind. He also suddenly felt that he would find it horribly repugnant to walk past that bench on which, after the girl had gone, he had sat and reflected. It would also, he thought, be horribly unpleasant to meet the man with the long moustache to whom he had given the 20-kopeck piece. The devil take him! He walked, looking around him in absent-minded hostility. Now all his thoughts were whirling around a single central point, and he felt that this central point really did exist, and that now, only now, was he alone face to face with it. And for the first time since these 2 months had elapsed. And the devil take all of this, he suddenly thought, in a fit of inexhaustible rancour. If it's begun, it's begun, and to the devil with her, and the new life. Lord, how stupid all that was, and how much lying and baseness I've sunk to today. How vilely I've cringed and fawned back there in front of that cretin, Ilya Petrovitch. And in fact that's all a lot of rubbish too. I don't give a spit for any of them, or any of it. Not even for my having cringed and fawned. That has nothing to do with it, nothing to do with it at all. Suddenly he stopped in his tracks. A new, quite unexpected question of extreme simplicity threw him off balance in a flash, and bitterly amazed him. If you really did all that with all your wits about you, and not like some fool in a trance. If you really had a firm and definite goal before you, then how is it you still haven't even looked in the purse to see what you've got? The prize for which you've taken all those torments upon yourself and intentionally done such a base, vile, loathsome thing. I mean, you were going to throw the purse into the water just now, along with all the other things, which you haven't examined either. No, just now, weren't you? What's the meaning of that? Yes, it was true. Every bit of it was true. He had, in fact, been conscious of it all along, and it was not a new question in any way. In deciding to throw everything into the water, he had done so without the slightest hesitation or demur, but straight out, as though that was the way he had planned it, and no other way could possibly be imagined. Yes, he had known it all, and borne it all in his mind. Indeed, it had all been decided yesterday, that the very moment when he had sat over the chest and pulled the leather cases from it. Oh, it was true all right. It's because my health's not at all good, he decided morosely at last. I've worn myself out with all this worry. I don't know what I'm about. I was doing it yesterday, and the day before yesterday. I've been doing it all these weeks, wearing myself out with worry. If I get better, I'll stop doing it. But what if I don't get better at all? Lord, how sick of all this I am. He continued to talk, never stopping once. He had a terrible desire to get his mind off the whole business altogether, but didn't know how to go about it. A certain new, unmasterable sensation was gaining a stronger and stronger hold of him with practically every minute that passed. It was an infinite, almost physical revulsion to everything he encountered and everything that surrounded him. An emotion that was insistent, hostile, and full of hatred. He found all the people he met repulsive. Their faces, their manner of walking, their movements were repulsive to him. He reflected that if anyone had said anything to him, he'd quite simply have spat at that person or bitten him. Suddenly, as he emerged onto the embankment of the Malaya Neva on Vasily Island beside the bridge, he stopped in his tracks. This is where he lives, right here, in this building, he thought. What on earth? I would never have come to see Razumikin of my own accord. It's the same story as last time, but it really is very curious. Did I come here of my own accord? Or did I simply walk around and end up here? It doesn't make any difference. I said the day before yesterday that I'd go and see him the day after it. Well, and so I shall. I can't really very well not go up and see him now in any case. He climbed the stairs to the 5th floor where Razumikin lived. His friend was at home in his little room. At that moment he was at work, writing, and he let Raskolnikov in himself. It was some 4 months since they had seen each other. Razumikin sat in his room wearing a dressing gown that was worn to rags, with slippers on his bare feet, tousled, unshaven, unwashed. His face expressed astonishment. "Never!" he cried, examining his newly arrived companion from head to toe. And then he fell silent, let out a whistle. "Whew, are things really as bad as that? Well, brother, you've gone one better than I." He looked at Raskolnikov's rags. "Oh, sit down, you must be tired," he said. And at those words Raskolnikov subsided onto the oilcloth Turkish sofa, which was in an even worse state than his own. Razumikin suddenly perceived that his visitor was ill. "I say, you're seriously ill. Do you know that?" He began to feel his pulse. Raskolnikov tore his hand free. "Stop it," he said. "I've come. Look, I've got no teaching. I was going to... Actually, I don't need any teaching at all." "You know something? You're delirious," Razumikin observed, studying him with fixed attention. "No, I'm not." Raskolnikov got up from the sofa. When he had been climbing the stairs to Razumikin's room, it had not occurred to him that he might have to confront him face to face. Now, however, in a single instant, He knew from experience that what he felt least of all like doing just then was to confront anyone face to face, anyone in the whole wide world. All his spleen rose up within him. Hardly had he stepped across the threshold of Razumikin's room than he nearly choked with the venom at himself. "Goodbye," he said suddenly, and walked to the door. "What's this? You're off again? Wait, you strange fellow!" "Stop it," Raskolnikov said again, once more tugging his hand free. "What the devil did you come for, then? Have you gone crazy, or what? I mean, it's almost insulting. I won't let you go just like that." "Oh, listen, I came to you because I don't know anyone else who could have helped me to get started. Because you're kinder than all the rest of them, more intelligent, I mean, and you're able to take an objective view of things. But now I realise that I don't need anything. Do you hear? Nothing at all. Need no help or sympathy from anyone. I'll manage by myself, on my own. Well, I've said enough, now leave me alone." "Wait a minute, chimney sweep. You're completely mad. I mean, as far as I am concerned, you can do as you please. You see, I haven't any teaching worth a spit, but down at the flea market there's a bookseller by the name of Keruvimov, who's a whole lesson in himself. I wouldn't exchange him now for 5 hours teaching in a merchant's house. He does these special editions and publishes miserable little books on natural science, but my, don't they sell! The titles alone are worth something. You always used to say I was stupid, but my God, brother, there are folk more stupid than I am." Now he started going in for the radical stuff too. Not that he has an ounce of sympathy for the cause himself, but I encourage him all the same. Look, here are 2 of a bit printer's sheets of some German text. If you ask me, it's the most inane charlantry. What it discusses, in short, is the question of whether a woman is a human being or not. Well, needless to say, the author solemnly manages to prove that she is. Keruvimov's going to bring it out as one of those woman question books. I'm the translator. He'll spin out these 2 and a bit sheets into 6. We'll dream up the most lavish title you've ever seen, half a page long, and put it on the market at 50 kopecks a throw. It'll do very nicely. I'm being paid 6 roubles a sheet. That means I'll get about 15 roubles for the whole thing. I've taken 6 in advance. When we finish this one, we'll start translating a thing about whales. And then there are some really boring, spicy bits from the second part of the confessions that we've marked out. We'll translate them too. Someone told Keruvimov that Rousseau was a sort of radish chef. Who am I to argue? Let him go to the devil. Well, how would you like to translate the second sheet of Is Woman Human? If you like, you can take the text with you right now. Take some pens and paper. It's all government stuff. And have 3 roubles. Since my advance was for the whole translation for the first sheet and the second sheet, 3 roubles is about right for your share. And when you finish the sheet, you'll get another 3 roubles. And there's one other thing. Please don't think I'm doing you a favour. On the contrary, as soon as you walked in, I figured you could be of use to me. For one thing, my spelling is terrible. For another, my German is quite simply Schwach. So what I write is mostly just my own invention, and I like to think it's even better than the original. Well, but who knows? Perhaps it isn't. Perhaps it's worse. Will you do it? Or won't you? Raskolnikov silently took the sheets containing the German text of the article, accepted the 3 roubles, and went out without saying a word. Razumikin stared after him in astonishment. Having got as far as the first line, however, Raskolnikov suddenly turned back, went back up to Razumikov's room, placed both sheets and money on the table, and left again, still without saying a word. "I think you must have the DTs," Razumikin roared at last, frantic with rage. "What kind of play-acting is this? You've got me so I don't know whether I'm coming or going. What did you come here for, damn it?" "I don't need any translations," Raskolnikov muttered, already on his way downstairs. "Well, what do you need then, damn it?" Razumikin shouted from above. Raskolnikov silently continued his descent. "Hey, where are you living?" There was no answer. "Well then, to the devil with you!" But by this time Raskolnikov was already out on the street. At Nicholas Bridge he was once again forced wide awake by something extremely unpleasant that happened to him. The driver of a carriage gave him a solid blow across the back with his knout for having very nearly ended up under the horse's hoofs, even though the driver had shouted to him some 3 or 4 times. This blow made Raskolnikov so angry that, having darted aside to the railings, for some reason he had been walking along the very middle part of the bridge, which is used by vehicles, not pedestrians, he began to gnash and grind his teeth in envenomed fury. It went without saying that laughter arose all around him. "Got what he deserved? Must be some kind of clever dick. That's all one. They pretend to be drunk and fall under the wheels on purpose. Then you're responsible for them. That's how they make their living, my dear fellow. That's how they make their living." At that moment, however, as he was standing by the railings, still staring vacantly and in fury after the receding carriage and rubbing his back, he suddenly felt someone shove a coin into his hand. He looked. It was an elderly merchant's wife in a golovka and goatskin shoes, accompanied by a girl, probably her daughter, in a bonnet, holding a green parasol. "Take it, dearie, for the love of Christ," the woman said. He took it, and they walked on by. It was a 20-kopeck piece. From his clothes and general appearance, they might very well have concluded that he was a beggar, a genuine street-gatherer of small change. But this donation of a whole 20-kopeck piece was more likely due to the blow he had received from the knout, which had moved them to pity. Clutching the 20-kopeck piece in his hand, he walked on about 10 paces and turned round to face the Neva, looking towards the palace. There was not the least trace of cloud in the sky, and the water was almost blue, something very rare for the Neva. The dome of the cathedral, which is in no other spot so clearly delineated as when viewed from here on the bridge, not 20 paces from the chapel, was fairly gleaming, and through the pure air it was possible to discern clearly each one of its adornments. The pain of the knout had died away, and Raskolnikov had forgotten about the blow. A certain restless and not quite limpid thought was preoccupying him, now to the exclusion of all else. He stood looking into the distance fixedly and for a long time. This place was particularly familiar to him. When he had been going to university, he had been in the habit, most often as he was returning home, of stopping, he must have done it at least 100 times, at this very spot, peering fixedly at this indeed magnificent panorama, and each time being almost astonished by a certain vague and enigmatic feeling it aroused in him. He always felt an inexplicable coldness drifting towards him from this magnificent panorama. For him this lavish tableau was full of tongueless, hollow spirit. Each time he had marvelled at his gloomy and mysterious emotion, and had postponed its fathoming until some future date, not trusting his judgment. Now he suddenly had a vivid recollection of his earlier sense of wonder and bewilderment, and he thought it no accident that he should have remembered it now. The mere fact that he had stopped at the same place as before seemed to him amazing and outlandish, as though he actually imagined that he could think about the same things as before, and be carried away by the same ideas and images that had carried him away before, only such a short time ago. It very nearly made him laugh, but at the same time his chest felt constricted to the point of pain. In some deep space below him, scarcely visible beneath his feet, he now beheld the whole of his earlier past, his old thoughts, old problems, old preoccupations, and old feelings. And this whole panorama, and himself, and everything. He seemed to be flying somewhere into the heights, and everything seemed to vanish before his eyes. Making an automatic movement with his hand, he suddenly felt the 20-kopeck piece that was clutched in it. He unclenched his fist, stared fixedly at the little coin, and, with a swing of his arm, hurled it into the water. Then he turned on his heel and went home. At that moment he felt as though, with a pair of scissors, he had cut himself off from everyone and everything. It was getting on towards evening when he arrived back at his room. That meant that he had been walking for some 6 hours altogether. By what route and in what manner he had returned, of that he had no memory. Taking off his coat, and shivering all over like a horse that had been driven too hard, he lay down on the sofa, pulled the overcoat on top of him, and sank into instant oblivion. He awoke in deep twilight to the sound of a terrible clamour. God, what a clamour it was! Never had he heard or witnessed such unnatural sounds, such a wailing, such a howling, such a gnashing of teeth, such weeping, beating and cursing. He could not even imagine such savagery, such frenzy. In horror he raised himself on one elbow and sat on his bed, rigid, tormented with anxiety. But the fighting and the howling and cursing were getting louder and louder, and then, to his most profound amazement, he suddenly caught the voice of his landlady. She was howling, screeching and wailing, her words coming out in a hurried stream, so that it was impossible to decipher what she was pleading for. Probably for whoever it was to stop beating her, for someone was mercilessly beating her on the staircase. The voice of the man who was doing the beating had become so terrible with spite and rabid fury that it was now little more than a wheeze, and even so he was also saying something, and also quickly, indecipherably, in a hurry, and choking. Suddenly Raskolnikov began to tremble like a leaf. He had recognised that voice. It belonged to Ilya Petrovitch. Ilya Petrovitch was beating his landlady. He was kicking her, drubbing her head against the steps. There was no doubt about it. One could tell it by the sounds, by the howls, by the blows. What was this? Had the world turned upside down, or what? On every floor, all the length of the staircase, a crowd could be heard gathering. There were voices, exclamations, people coming up the stairs, knocking at doors, banging them, grouping together. But why? Why? And how is it possible? He kept repeating, seriously believing that he had gone completely insane. But no, he could hear it all too clearly. And if that were the case, they'd be coming up to his room now, because all this is probably connected with what happened yesterday. Oh, Lord! He wanted to lock himself in by setting the door on the hook, but his arm would not lift, and anyway it was no good. Fear enveloped his soul like ice, torturing him and turning him into stiff and numb, and then, at last, all this commotion, which must have lasted all of 10 minutes, began gradually to die away. His landlady continued to moan and groan. Ilya Petrovitch still threatened and shouted abuse. But finally his voice too died away. There he could be heard no longer. Has he really gone? Oh, Lord! Yes, and there was his landlady going too, still moaning and weeping. There was her door banging shut. There were the people who formed the crowd, dispersing on the stairs and going back to their apartments, exclaiming, arguing, crying out to one another, now raising their voices to a shout, now lowering them to a whisper. There must have been a lot of them. Practically the whole building had taken part. Oh, God, is this really possible, he thought. And why? Why did he come here? Raskolnikov fell onto the sofa in helpless exhaustion, but was now unable to close his eyes. For half an hour he lay in such suffering, such an unendurable sense of limitless horror as he had never in his life experienced. Suddenly his room was lit by a bright light. Nastasia had come in with a candle and a plate of soup. Giving him an attentive look, and perceiving that he was not asleep, she put the candle down on the table and began to lay out the things she had brought: bread, salt, the plate, a spoon. I do believe he hasn't eaten a thing since yesterday. Been gaddy all day, he has, and all the time he's got the fever on him. Nastasia, why was the landlady being beaten? Who was beating the landlady? Oh, just now, half an hour ago, Ilya Petrovich, the assistant superintendent, on the stairs. Why did he give her such a terrible beating? And why did he come here? Without saying a word, Nastasia studied him, frowning, and continued to look at him for a long time like that. This intense scrutiny began to make him feel very uncomfortable, even afraid. Nastasia, why didn't you say anything? He said at last, timidly, in a faint voice. That's blood, she replied at last, quietly, as though she were talking to herself. Blood? What blood? He muttered, turning pale and backing away against the wall. Nastasia continued to stare at him in silence. No one's been beating the landlady, she said in a firm, stern voice. He looked at her, scarcely breathing. I heard it with my own ears. I wasn't asleep. I was sitting up, he said, even more timidly. I spent a long time listening. The assistant superintendent came here. Everyone came out onto the stairs from all the apartments. No one's been here. That's your own blood making a noise inside you. It's when it can't get out and begins clotting in your liver. You start seeing things. Are you going to have some of this, or aren't you? He did not answer. Nastasia went on standing over him, staring fixedly at him and making no sign of being about to depart. Nastasiushka, I'm so thirsty. She went downstairs and a couple of minutes later returned with a white clay jug full of water, but he didn't remember what happened next. All he could remember was taking one sip of cold water and spilling some of the jugful on his chest. Thereupon unconsciousness ensued.